Mic check. Peas and carrots, peas and carrots. Planetarium. Hi, I'm Ashley Daigle, and this is Advice from the Cheerbrarian. Never heard that word before? Well, that's because I smushed two words together because I felt like it. This week, we're going to do what we always do, mix a dollop of advice to improve your life, born from a few of my successes and a boatload of my mistakes, with the book recommendation of the week, unearthed by my voracious love of reading, from self-help to historical fiction and everything in between. Today, we will be talking about the concept of happiness. What is it? Why is it so frustrating to chase it? And how we might be able to find a little bit more. If you like what you hear, and I really hope you do, please, pretty please, with two cherries on top, tell two people about this podcast and maybe even send them a link to an episode, because direct word of mouth is huge for a little pod of mine. Now, typically, this is when I say, and now let's get into it, or something else. But before we get started, in the esteemed words of Missy Elliott, I need to put my thing down, flip it, and also reverse it. Because today, I have to tell you about the author before I even talk about the book or the advice, because I am so excited. I cannot wait. And I'm afraid people will stop listening and they won't get this amazing little exciting announcement. So I'm going to tell you now, because next week on this pod, we're going to have a very exciting guest. She is a New York Times best-selling September 2023 Good Morning America book club pick novelist. What? How? Who? All very important questions. The who, I will tell you now, the who is Angie Kim. The what and the how, I will say for later, because you gotta, I am gonna leave you wanting more. But, don't pause and Google it. I'll get back to it. Just listen to the show. So now let's get into it. Are you happy? Are you happy? I feel like that was a mean trick of mine to start off with that because, man, that is a tricky question, isn't it? So, apologies if I just introduced an existential spiral. That is not my intention, but that is what we're going to talk about today because I spend a lot of time pondering the concept of happiness and what it means to lead a good life. And, this is just a topic that's really exciting to me. So I'm really pumped to talk about it with you. Happiness in particular is something that I spend a lot of time learning about. So there are two great podcasts I love to listen to. One is called 10% Happier by Dan Harris, and the other is The Happiness Lab by Dr. Laurie Santos. So those are two great other resources other than me. Total great also resource right now. And there's, I read articles on the topic. So this is something that I spend a lot of time on. And today we're going to take a peek under the happiness hood, a little alliteration for you, and demystify happiness and see if we can find a thing or two to try if you're looking to be a little bit happier. And for me, when I want to understand something, well, the first thing I need to do, this will come as a surprise to no one, is operationally define it. Because you can't understand something if you don't know what it means, which sounds that's a weird way to put it, but I'm going to leave it in because it makes sense to me. If it doesn't make sense to you, that's okay. The point is, I'm a word nerd and I go to the vocabulary of a thing to try to understand it because I can't measure happiness if I don't know what happiness is, right? We're going to start with my girl, Brene Brown. Brene, if you're listening, wow, so cool. How'd you get here? Also, call me. But Brene, as I've talked about her before in the podcast, is a famed researcher. She's a podcaster herself. She's an author, and she's someone that I go to when I'm trying to understand complicated feelings and emotions because that is what she has spent her life researching. I once again opened up Atlas of the Heart, which I talked about in the Brag It Up episode, to see what Brene had to say about happiness. And guess what? No wonder we are all filled with dread thinking about happiness and trying to discover it and what to do about it. She, as I said, expert in understanding the nuances of human experience, she says there's really no consensus in the research when it comes to defining happiness. So I'm going to call that good news because at least there's a reason for my hand wringing and my teeth gnashing, this is complicated. It's not an easy thing to understand. And if you can't understand it, well, then you can't achieve it. The other thing she said is that your usual level of happiness is fairly stable. So that means that even if you tried new things, you might not be able to, within, like a spectrum, be that much happier or that much unhappy because you sort of have a natural level that you are. And she also said that happiness is based on hereditary factors. So we're going to call that good news number two, in that if you feel like happiness eludes you, well, that's because some of it is genetic. So I guess when I say this is good news, it's like bad news because you can't necessarily do a lot about it, but it's, comforting to at least understand the frustration that there may not be a whole lot you could do to like jack your happiness up to 11 if that's, your goal. If you want to get your happiness jacked. What? Okay. Brene did have a few words. So the best definition she could come up with is that the state of happiness is, quote, feeling pleasure often related to the immediate environment or current circumstances. And so that explains to me a problem that I've been having. So sometimes it's like, are you happy with your life? And things I see on social media are about like how to cultivate like a happier life. But if the definition of happiness is about immediate environment or current circumstances, then trying to measure it in the scope of your whole life is already a fool's errand, because really happiness is about being in the moment and being present than it is a measurement of the whole enchilada or the whole stack of pancakes, if you will, of your life. So that at least has helped me to understand why I find this just elusive. So going back to the top with the question I started with that plagues me, are you happy? I don't think I can make a list of things to make you happier. That would be disingenuous because, happiness is so nebulous and subjective. And everything we just learned said that there may not be a whole lot you can do to adjust the metric. But don't worry, this is still going to be a hopeful episode. There are ways to have more positivity and cheer in our lives. I have pondered and synthesized all the things that I have learned on my Sisyphean. There, I said it this time. On my Sisyphean. I still don't know. I have pondered and synthesized what I've learned on my Sisyphean. Okay, last time. I'm leaving all this in because I want y'all to eventually in one episode, I'm going to say this word right the first time. So I've pondered and synthesized what I've learned on my Sisyphean quest for greater happiness. And I have created 3 Cheerbrarian approved happiness principles you can ascribe to if you want. Use them or lose them. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay. But this is just what I'm throwing out into the world that I hope helps. So, Cheerbrarian happiness principle number 1. Thou shalt not ask yourself if you are happy. Tell that pesky brain to be quiet. Because we just discovered that asking yourself if you're happy is probably going to just create more brain swirl. So instead of asking if you're happy, strive for mindfulness and presence. So try not to succumb to the societal pressure to measure yourself. I should just, record this, which I'm recording it. I should record myself recording it so I can play it for myself later to remind myself not to measure myself. There's something else we need to talk about when it comes to happiness. What happiness isn't. Happiness is not just a bubbly, perky, positive person. That doesn't mean that you're happy, right? If happiness is about satisfaction with current circumstances, then that is just an outward, appearance. And I say this as a self-identified and sometimes irritatingly bubbly, perky person. I know what I am. I know what I'm like. So that brings me to Cheerbrarian happiness principle number 2, which is, thou shalt not mistake positivity for happiness and presume that positive people are happy or that somber people are unhappy. This is a really important point that I want to make because as a society, and I mean more like in America because of what we sort of value as in personalities and things, we put too high a value on being positive and being cheerful and sort of the performance of that positivity, which can get into toxic positivity and things. And I think that can leave people who maybe have a more neutral or even naturally negative disposition feeling like they're wrong or they don't belong because they're not sort of performing this peppy ideal. And it's not wrong. It's just different. It's just another way of being. So if you feel that way, guess what? You're fine. You don't have to perform and exude, bubbliness. Be you, baby doll. And finally, since the pursuit of happiness, as we discovered today, is so foggy and confusing, is there anything you can do to try to be happier? Well, the good news is that joy and gratitude are associated with higher life satisfaction. And these are things that are a little easier to identify than what exactly happiness is. So, for the final Cheerbrarian happiness principle, number 3, it is thou shall invest more in moments of joy, aka making your own fun, and gratitude, aka noting, formally or informally, things you're grateful for. I just threw the J word out there, joy, and perhaps to you that is also a befuddling concept like happiness. But, what is joy? What makes you smile? What is an activity that you get lost in doing where the hours have passed you by and you feel happier? It can be literally anything. Perhaps you enjoy grilling meat, or you enjoy making dog treats for your dogs, or you enjoy lying down cozy under a blanket with your dog. Anything that makes you smile, it doesn't have to be complicated, can be joyful. So it's about trying to find time and opportunities to have just a little more joy in your life. And to speak about gratitude, in an earlier episode, I talked about how I have a gratitude journal. I write it every night before bed. You could try that. If that seems tedious or just not your vibe, just, when you're brushing your teeth, take 30 seconds and think about one thing you're grateful for the day. And y'all, it can literally be like, today, I am thankful for cheese. I am thankful I did not yell at that person. It can be anything. Sometimes you got to dig real deep, but I'm always surprised on a day that as a whole, I would give like a sounding meh overall. I can always find at least one thing to be grateful for. And so I bet you could too. And it would make you, just a little teeny weeny bit happier. This is just the start of our happiness journey here with the Cheerbrarian because I have called this episode part 1. And this is not because I already have a part 2 planned out at the moment. Think about it like that thing where there's an event and they call it first annual. And you're like, well, how do you know it's going to be the first annual? Because that means every year and it's the first one. I'm doing that same thing with this podcast because I don't know how many I'm going to do. I could go on 5 ever about it because I think questing toward happiness and trying to have more joy and positivity in life is a valid, albeit very clunky and confusing pursuit. So there will be much more to share as I continue to wage my own inner struggle against or toward the concept of happiness. And now we are going to transition into unrequired reading because I have a great fiction book that'll keep you guessing and uncover even more complicated feelings about happiness. Oh, and did I mention that next week I'm going to talk to the author? I know I mentioned it already. I'm just so excited. I'm mentioning it again. So buckle up, baby, because it's going to be another guest next week. But first, we're going to have to talk about her book. Today's book is very aptly titled for the episode because it is by author Angie Kim, and the book is called Happiness Falls. Do you get it? Because the episode is called Climb, and the book is called Falls. You have to make your own fun. There's a little bit of joy that I did for myself. So, how did I find this book? Well, this book was the one book, one community pick for my local library this year. So I read it and got to see her speak in person, which is what led me to send her a message on Instagram to say, you mentioned, you talk to book clubs and stuff. Do you want to be on my podcast? And she said, yes. And I was like, and then here we are. But let's talk about the book before I get too carried away with how excited I am to talk to her. So the opening sentence of this book is, we didn't call the police right away. I mean, y'all, that is a good line. This book is the story of a family searching for their missing father, told from the perspective of the 20-year-old daughter, Mia. Their mom is a first-generation Korean immigrant, and then Mia has a twin brother, John, and then they have another brother, Eugene, who is autistic and has a rare genetic disorder which renders him unable to communicate. And here is where it gets very interesting. He's the only one in the family who might know what has happened to the dad. Ooh, conflict. So I found this book really hard to put down, and it was really catered to my literary and personal interests. So first of all, done well, I enjoy stream of consciousness, and Maria is a super fun Mia, there we go, is a fun character to have in the driver's seat because she's smart and she's irreverent, she's really curious, and I just loved hearing her story and her talk. And so she uses footnotes in a really fun way to try to reel in her asides and ramblings. She's like, hey, you can ignore this if you want. And that's a feature when I do my own writing. So I found it charming. And then secondly, why we're talking about this book this week is that this book has some plot points that I don't think it spoils to mention this because the word happiness is in the title, but that happiness psychology features heavily in the book, which obviously I find fascinating as this whole podcast is kind of about that, or this episode. And so Angie Kim essentially ticked down a checklist of things Ashley would like to read about in a book. So great job. And I cannot believe that I'm going to talk to her next week. Like, are you kidding me? Like, what? This book is not one you want to miss. It was Oprah Daly's #1 novel of 2023, a Washington Post Best Book of the Year, and like I mentioned at the top of the episode, the September 2023 book club pick from Good Morning America Book Club. And next week, I'm going to talk to Angie about it, and I'm going to ask her about the pursuit of happiness and how she feels about all these things. So excited. Speaking again of happiness, it's time for me to sprinkle some because it's time for another one of my favorite parts of the week, bragging on other people. I launched the I Do Mean to Brag segment because, as I covered in the Brag It Up episode, it can be hard to brag on yourself. So I'm here to do it for you. Bwah, 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 bwah. Air horn. Bwah, 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 bwah. Bwah, 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 bwah. I got a little melodic. That was nice. The first brag this week goes out to Becky, and it is a goal brag. So Becky was planning to run an upcoming half marathon, but due to current circumstances and injuries, she is being smart about recovery and has gone down to a 10K distance. So with this change, she identified and has reasonably adjusted expectations and is rocking this new goal. So my take on this brag is that this one comes with this is a little bit of brag whiplash, because when she reached out to me about it, she was then like, well, maybe this isn't a brag, but this is exactly the kind of stuff I want to brag about, because knowing your limitations and listening to your body instead of worrying about external messaging or your intended plans or like, oh, I said I was going to do this, that's huge, because it is really important for us to be proud of ourselves, not just for producing and accomplishing and like pushing ourselves to the limit, but for knowing those limits and adjusting and being kind to ourselves. And in her own words, she is reasonably adjusting expectations and rocking a new goal. So way to go, Becky. Yeah. Our second brag this week goes out to Valerie, and it is an awareness brag. So Valerie is a mom of 2 kids with disabilities, and the oldest uses a communication device, which is a similarity to one of the characters in Happiness Falls. So it's fortuitous that I have this to brag on today. And so Valerie was instrumental in creating more awareness in her city for kids using augmentative, and alternative communication, AAC. And in fact, she also started an AAC camp for kids using AAC. And they are now planning for their 9th consecutive year of camp. And if you're interested in hearing more, she has her own podcast that I will link in the show notes. So my take on Valerie, I mean, wow, everybody. Not only is she working tirelessly for her kids and her family, but she's making a difference for other people. And I think finding connection is a truly worthy pursuit. So I applaud her for her efforts and successes in this arena. Amazing job, Valerie. It would certainly be an additional bright spot in my day to have the opportunity to brag about you. Yes, you. I'm talking to you. So think about something you're proud of, whether it's a huge goal you've achieved or something that you've reconfigured in your own life. Anything, nothing is too small for some love. So reach out to me if you want your own brag moment on Instagram or Facebook. And now it's time for us to say farewell. So that's it. today's episode. I love a little recap because life is busy and I want you to have something to take with you today, a little nugget of wisdom. So what did we do today? Well, the unsolicited advice of this episode was to subscribe to the 3 Cheerbrarian happiness principles. Number 1, thou shalt not ask yourself if you are happy. Tell that brain to be quiet. Number 2, thou shalt not mistake positivity for happiness and presume that positive people are happy or somber people are unhappy. And number 3, thou shalt invest more in moments of joy and gratitude. In an unrequired reading, I recommended Happiness Falls by Angie Kim, and next week I'm going to get to talk to her about this book and her writing process, and it's going to be great. And last but certainly not least, we gave big braggy props to Becky for setting realistic goals and for Valerie for her work in awareness in her community. And please follow and review wherever you pod and join the Cheerbrarian on Instagram or Facebook by following me at the @Cheerbrarian handle. That's where you can see resource links and other goodies. Now go on, get out of here. Give yourself a break. Drink more water. Okay, bye.